Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast, an ongoing series of conversations and considerations to help people understand and embrace their own unique creativity for fulfilling lives and brilliant careers. My name is Ben Talon. I'm an illustrator and author, and I bring 16 years of creative industry experience working with the New York Times, The Guardian, the Premier League, and more. And I invite designers, artists, psychologists, scientists, coaches, athletes, sensitivity experts, and all kinds of thought leaders to help us broaden our knowledge of creativity. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, a vital ingredient in the solutions to our problems, but so often misunderstood. The show is supported by founding sponsor and B Corp, Illustration X. Take a look at their stunning range of illustrators and animators at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, it's by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on Spotify and all good music streaming services.
So I was very fortunate growing up well off. Dad was a bookmaker, an illegal bookmaker originally, went legal in 61. Mum was a factory worker from Aston. Dad was from Spark, both working class neighbourhoods. So although I grew up in a prosperous family, my mum and dad were very proud of their backstreet belongings, not just origin, they still belonged to them. So I grew up as well with Dad being a bookie. We were kind of looked down upon by middle class people because of Dad's occupation was seen as something wrong. Mum was very much an Aston woman. The old Birmingham phrase, when she was dying, she lived with us for 5 years. My wife was a wonderful carer. And a few times we talked about what Mum wanted. And she moved to South Birmingham from North Birmingham when she was 18, when she married our old man. But she never left Aston. It was in here. It was in her heart. It was in her soul. And when I was talking to her, she'd go, "When I die, son, take me back home." The old Birmingham word for home is home. And I said, I did take her back home. I took her down the street, White House Street, Aston. There's nothing there now except a wasteland and some factories. But when Mum lived there, there was 35 great-grandchildren and grandchildren and of my great-granny and granddad. So when we got down the street, where the entry would have been to Mum's yard of back-to-back houses, her cousin stood, an old school pals, because that's what the street would have done. So from an very early age, Ben, I was very aware that I was privileged, that I had the opportunity to live in a better home, that I had the opportunity to have a good state education, but that I felt growing up working class because that was the culture I was brought up with. And I felt as I've got older that if I said I was middle class, I'd be betraying all those people that work so hard to allow me to have a choice in my life. Why is it that if you become successful in something, you cease to be working class? I don't buy that. There's hundreds, millions of successful working class people. And then secondly, we need to define what do we mean by success. It isn't necessarily monetary success. It could be rearing a good family. It could be being a good neighbour. There's lots of different ways we can look at success, particularly from a working class perspective. So my nan lived in a masonette after they moved out of a back-to-back in Aston. Spent a lot of time in the school holidays, stopping over at our nan's and going to the Villa. She was a mad Villa fan, as well as my mum. Always went to see Mum's uncles, my great uncles in King's Standing and over in Erdington, Aston, Pipe Hayes. Big family, Mum's family was. Fighting family, but they were rumbustious. They always told stories. Dad's family was South Birmingham, but they also told stories. And they could also handle themselves, but were not quite as rumbustious and boisterous as our mum's uncles. But I worked in the betting shops from when I was 13. And that, again, gave me an insight into the people I belonged to. Because there was people that would bet with us. We had our betting shops in Sparkbrook on the Ladypool Road, where Dad's family had lived since the 1870s, people who remembered my great-grandparents and who told me stories. So I grew up, lots of people would come to our mums on a Sunday. There'd be our nan, there'd be my granddad Perry. Granddad came from Highgate, another poorer working class neighbourhood. He had a very tough upbringing. He had multiple sclerosis, couldn't walk, but he inspired me with his stories. and his love of the old Brummie language without him realising he was passing it on. So from a very early age, I listened to those stories. I was enchanted by them. And I think, given that I was born in 1956, I just caught the end of their world, just as it was being destroyed in the 60s. So I remember going to my great-grandmother's back-to-back. I remember visiting friends of my nan's in back-to-backs. I remember our nan's masonette, which is now gone. It was the first time she'd had hot water inside and a bath inside and a toilet inside. Yeah. I remember how fortunate I was, and Mum and Dad always drilled it into me. You don't forget where you come from. You don't forget your roots. So my whole life really has been about wanting to give something back to those I belong to. Not just my family, but all those families. Because when I started on the radio on BBC WM and then was writing for the Birmingham Mail and later the Express and Star in Wolverhampton, the Black Country, thousands of people wrote to me with their stories. I've got a huge archive. Can't get funding for it. If it was a middle-class archive, I'd get the money just like that. It's a working-class archive. Hundreds of people I interviewed to get their stories. So those are the people that motivate me, and those are the people that still push me forward.
Brilliant. And you know, I really resonate with that idea of that should you come across success, whatever form that takes on, that it somehow changes your class. Because I'm from Keighley in West Yorkshire, so I'm you know, I live in Salisbury now. I've done okay. I've been an illustrator for 16 years. There's been a lot of lean years in there, but there's been some good years. But most importantly, I've been able to raise 2 small children, a lovely family. We've got a house that we can call our own here in Salisbury. That is great success to me. But does that make me middle class? I don't think it does. My values in this life are very much exactly what you've described there, Carl, which is storytelling and the human story and individuals, but also communities, because I think this is something that we need direly to get back to, which is that family unit and intergenerational.
It's about that sorry to interject there, but it is that intergenerational. It's also about recognising kinship networks. It's about recognising the importance of poorer women in poorer neighbourhoods who were the glue that brought the neighbourhoods together. Middle class planners and developers never saw these intricate micro communities. They're overlapped with the next street through a corner pub or a corner shop or a main shopping road. So from a small street, it would overlap to the next couple of streets, and they would overlap. So you build up the neighbourhood from the neighbourhood to the town or the city. They never saw that. So when they redeveloped Birmingham and Manchester and Salford and Leeds in the 50s and the 60s, Sheffield, etc., they just went in pell-mell, knocked down everything, move people out, split up those communities. What they never did, they didn't ask the women. They didn't ask the men, but really they should have been talking with the women. The only middle class people that ever asked for the voice to women was the Tudor Walters Committee at the end of the First World War, when they knew they were going to try and build homes for heroes. It never transpired, but the will was there. But they actually asked working class women, what do you want from a house? And they said, we want a parlour at the front and a room at the back. And they went, well, why do you want a parlour? Because when we've come to working class people's homes and there's a parlour, nobody ever uses it except on high days and holidays. And the women went, exactly. We want one room that will be tidy, that will have our tranclements in or our best little bits and pieces that we can show off to at Christmas Day or Boxing Day and high days and holidays. And that was the only time they started to build council houses in 2021 with parlours, but then the money ran out.
It's safe to say that storytelling, that culture that you've just described must have played a huge part in your interest, and especially the local aspect with Birmingham. Was that encouraged and fostered within your family setup?
Yeah, I think it was fostered and encouraged unconsciously, and then more consciously as I got older, if that makes sense. There's a wonderful book that influenced me a lot by a man called Robert Roberts. I don't know if you've ever read it, Ben. It's about growing up in Salford in the first 25 years of the 20th century. Well worth the read. Deeply influenced me as a social historian. It's called The Classic Slum. Now, I wouldn't use the term slum. I used it in a couple of my early books, and Mum told me off. My nan told me off. They said, we might have lived in bad quality housing, but it wasn't a slum. So I don't use that term now, but except for when it is in the purely neutral sense of meaning an area of bad housing and insanitary environment. Because I think the trouble is the term slum then becomes code, not even code, a derogatory term for the people that live there. But let's stick with what Roberts called his book. He called it the classic slum. It's so insightful. But one of the reasons I think it's so insightful is that his mum was a shopkeeper and his dad was a skilled worker. He said, we lived there. We were part of the community, but we weren't part of the community as well. So we had the view of an insider, but also he had the ability to be able to look from the outside of it. I feel in a way that I've been able to do that. I feel as like I'm an insider, although I didn't live that life, but I'm also able to look at it as well. Now, Robert Roberts was a big influence on me, a very big influence, because he came out with phrases like, to the west of us, beyond the tram lines, lay the middle class, bay windowed and begardened. What a wonderful phrase to show the different levels. You know, you've got a bay window, little front garden. That makes you better off. Yeah. You know, beyond the tram lines, even more so. And when I did my doctoral thesis, it was about my dad's area, Ladypool Road, which we still live close by. I worked in there for a long time. But I still feel a bond with Sparkbrook. It's now an overwhelmingly South Asian, Brummy Muslim area. But I still love going down there because you can see the family and kinship networks are at work like they were with the white working class. And I think one of the things that's very sad that's happened over the last 30 years is that they're trying to split the working class up by antagonising whites against Muslim, African Caribbean against this body, you know, race, colour, creed, split us up. What's a poor white kid, a poor African Caribbean kid, and a poor South Asian kid got in common? Well, one, they're all poor here, but they're all poor.
Yeah.
They've all got that in common. They've shared this space. So for me, history is not only about looking at the past, it's about seeing. You can't learn exact lessons because the context of time and place changes, but you can look for guides from the past. It wasn't until I got to university and got my degree and was looking at doing a master's that the tutor I went to see said, Carl, you haven't got Latin. You got Latin O-level, but not Latin A-level. You can't do this period. He said, but we've heard you talking about where your mum and dad come from, about your family and all their stories. Go and see Dorothy Thompson. And I went to Dorothy Thompson, who, as you'll know, was a superb historian in her own right, wrote a really important book about Chartist women. But her husband, Edward E.P. Thompson, transformed the way that we looked at history with his seminal work, The Making of the English Working Class. Dorothy actually, Ben, gave me the confidence to write about the people I belong to. I'm the first one of my family to go to a grammar school, a state school, not a posh grammar school. There was a lot more grammar schools in the 60s and 70s. I was the first one to take O-levels, the first one to take A-levels, the first one to go to university. I originally went to Manchester, but I left after 3-4 weeks because I was so homesick. Nobody in my family ever left home till they got married.
Yeah.
So I came back. I was fortunate to get a job, an interview in Birmingham and to get in at Birmingham. But they're their institutions. The middle class set them up for them. There is that class ceiling, not a glass ceiling, a class ceiling. And there was a small clique of us from lower middle class, better off working class backgrounds who were outnumbered by private school kids. And they just got on with it really easily. It was their world. For us, we having to learn a new language. And it was Dorothy Thompson who gave me that confidence. She said, write about the people you belong to, the stories, Carl, that you've got as a young man then. I'm an old man now, but then back in the early 80s, or late 70s, early 80s, she was really believed in what I was talking about. And she encouraged me deeply. And for years, Ben, when I met her for our meetings, I'd call her Mrs. Thompson. And on one occasion, I was about 26 or 27 with married and 2 kids. And they said to me, Carl, please call me Dorothy. I said, yes, Mrs. Thompson. Call me Dorothy. Yes, Mrs. Thompson, because that's how I've been brought up. It took me years to lose. And I don't think any of us from our background ever quite lose. Not the sense of inferiority, but the belief that perhaps should we be here? Then we had our first child. So I left university, worked full time for the old man. I was still going to the seminars. And then Dad sold up. I'd had a couple of armed robberies. One more year, I got an opportunity for one more year grant. But after that, I was on the dole. But it actually gave me, I hated it, but it gave me the time to finish my thesis. And the day before I had to hand it in, you know, you do your footnotes and all that. And I'd said to Mrs. Thompson, look at me again. I'm 67. I said to Mrs. Thompson, I said to Dorothy, Dorothy, what do you do when you find something that you haven't found yourself, but it's in another work? She said, you say cited. Oh, great. So I did that. And the day before I had to hand in my thesis, I took it in to a lovely man who also understood me, called Dr. Ben Benedict's in the library. I said, would you just have a check, make sure I've got everything? And he called me back in later after. He says, Carl, most of it's fine. I said, but how do you spell the word cited? I said, Sighdted. He said, why do you write it like that? I said, because I've seen it. It's cited. He went, no, Carl, it's CITED. So that night then, I was going through, I had to hand it in first thing the next morning. I think I got to bed about 4 or 5 in the morning. I was Tipexing out, SIG. There wasn't loads, but I wanted to check it. I had to reread the whole lot to make sure there was no mistakes. So it's things like that that make you realise that no matter what a good education I had as a grammar school, which was good, it wasn't the same as kids who've grown up going to private schools. And it never will be unless we get a more egalitarian educational system.
You know, I graduated in 2006 in Preston on a degree in illustration.
Yeah.
I was able to do that thanks to unconditional support in a very, you know, we were a low-income family, but what we had was a lot of love, a lot of passion for the arts. My uncle wrote comedy for people like Bob Monkhouse. And
Right.
yeah, he did it very fleetingly, very sporadically, just in his own time. He's always lived a very kind of quiet life, dipped in and out. Another uncle, now in his 50s, he's writing about the punk scene. My dad loves comedy, loves history, great storyteller, loves community. There's a lot of voluntary work now. And my mum went to college and painted, but not uni. I was the first person to go to uni. It wasn't really an option in their generation. They grew up in the 50s and the 60s, and you went to work in either a factory or, my mum did hairdressing. But what I had was the next generation where we had more opportunities and we had not too unreasonable student loans. Therefore, we had freedom of mind to play and to meet like-minded people and to actually take those 3 years to do it and to learn our craft. It's now become much more transactional because of the lofty tuition fees. I've got friends who are tutors. They have relationships where the kids won't experiment because they want to know they're on the path to success at the start of a 3-year degree in the arts, so they won't explore and play. And again, this is a very, I think this is brought on by those tuition fees. You don't have to look too far beyond that. What I'm interested in is that, that confidence and how that's been passed down the generations and the kind of historic role of the arts in terms of classes. Would I be right in thinking that, this was always a luxury of the upper classes?
Very much. And also, not only a luxury of the upper classes, we have to define what art is. Again, how are we going to define all these things? I hate the term lower class because it means that, are we lower? I think you're right. There is that legacy. And I fear it's got stronger. I fear it's got stronger because I fear what's happened is over the last 40 years, 50 years, people like ourselves, our families have got on and we've moved out. We've done all right. So I actually feel the position of people that may be in deprived neighbourhoods is now worse than in the past because there's less people there, but they're more cut off from the rest of society. And that really angers me because the poorer working class no longer matter economically. They don't matter socially. They don't matter culturally to people in power. They don't vote as much. What we've got to do is transform that and re-energise people. Do you know, Ben, it's not going to be... They talked when 1918, 100 years since women got the vote. No, 100 years since middle-class women got the vote. The vote actually didn't go to my great-grandmother, your great-great-grandmother, until 1928. It wasn't until 1918 that all working class men, poorer men, found it hard to get the vote because you had to go and prove that you'd lived in a place for 12 months. Well, if they were like my great-grandparents, they were always knocking the landlord and moving. You couldn't get the vote. That's what the trade union movements began with. That's what the cooperative movement, all these movements were about equality, but energizing people as part of the political nation. Too many of us now are divorced. We're either excluded or marginalized from the political nation. How many working class MPs are there now? How many MPs are there who've got small businesses? How many are there? Very, very few, I would say. So the avenues, it's been cut off. The arts are cutting off people from working class backgrounds. The only avenue that's left for many working class kids is football for lads and for girls now increasingly is football. It's outrageous. You know, in the 60s and 70s, there was outpouring of culture from working class bands. But now the biggest bands, most of them, not all, but most of them are dominated by kids who've had very privileged upbringings. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't be involved, but something's gone wrong in society when so many talented young working class people can no longer get into acting.
Despite the support I had in the family, none of us were still truly aware of what the creative industry looked like. I was fortunate in that I had accidental mentors along the way, so school teachers who went above the call of duty to connect me with a local college, for example, and things like that. I relied on chance for that to happen, and I was supported. So for kids who were not supported, who were scratching around, who were getting kicked out of school and made to believe that they're stupid and bad people, how on earth are they ever going to have the time to find that? So where the hell are they going to even find the arts, let alone afford getting into education?
The national curriculum is a straitjacket. It's squeezing the life out of working class youngsters because it's not opening up opportunities, it's restricting opportunities. Lots of schools now, as you said, can't put on drama, they can't put on music classes, or they will put it on, but the mums and dads got to pay. How can they afford to pay? But it should be within a much more democratic, egalitarian society, which allows people to develop their talents and their skills. And it's forcing young people into thinking, well, it's not for us. It's not for us. We won't do it. And it's again, there was a wonderful councillor in Birmingham called Frank Price. He became a Lord Mayor in his later 90s, did very well for himself. He came from a back-to-back in a poor part of Birmingham, Hockley. And when he became a councillor, he was determined to open the arts up for working class people. And without him, the Midland Arts Centre, what's now known as the MAC, wouldn't have happened. But increasingly, what we find with organisations that are set up to open up, working class people don't feel that it's for them.
Yeah.
And so what we've got to do is challenge that as well. We've got to break down that lack of confidence. People like me and you have still got it. After 67 years, I'm still feeling well, and we still face that. I've faced a lot of prejudice over my accent. I've faced it at the university. I faced it on BBC WM, our own station. And I'll give you an example of one of the words. I wouldn't use this word to a young woman, but in Birmingham, the Black Country, Stoke, and some other areas, the word wench is not offensive. So my nan was our wench. Our wench was your big sister who minded you and loved you and gave up her childhood for you. My mum, when she was dying, said to me, Carl, take me back home. I'm a backstreet wench.
Yeah.
I used that phrase on the radio the once to an older woman. And then I was called in the following week by the manager saying I shouldn't use that word. I said, why not? I didn't use it to a younger woman because she wouldn't have known. She might have thought it was an insult. The next week, an old lady rang up. The first call I got was, oh, Carl, I do love it when you call us old wenches. They're imposing their language on us. They're imposing their attitude to what is right and wrong. It might be wrong for them, but it's not for us. And there's lots of words like that we're told we're not supposed
Yeah.
to use, phrases we're not supposed to bring into our speech. So we're taught from an early age that the way we. Have you ever heard of a folk group called Show of Hands?
I've heard the
They're
name.
brilliant. You must. They've got a song about regaining patriotism and saying it's my flag too. I want it back. And they go, from an early age, we're taught to say the way we speak isn't right. Now, when I talk about patriotism, Ben, I'm talking about something inclusive. I'm not a nationalist. I can't stand nationalism. It excludes. It sets up the other. Patriotism to me is a love of place, a love of country, love of city, love of town, love of neighbourhood, which is inclusive. As a Brummie from a white working class background, I welcome all those other Brummies and feel part of all those other Brummies, and they welcome me. Not a one-way street.
And this goes back to the community that we discussed earlier. I do believe that if we had tighter communities and things like gentrification hadn't driven people out of neighborhoods and broke that collective voice, that we wouldn't have, the division that is imposed by media and the likes coming from the top down wouldn't be anywhere near as effective, because you'll be the same as me, Carl, as somebody who in their life and in their career gets out and talks to people from all backgrounds. You see that humans are humans. It's if we all talk to one another and found the unity, you mentioned the Chartist movement with that kind of collective voice, then I think
the Chartist movement, some of the great leaders, there was Fergus O'Connor, Irish, Bronte O'Brien, Irish. There was, what was his name? He'll come back to me. There was a black leader. And so there's so many, what we need to look through, what have we got in common? Not what splits us up. Less than 100 years since we all got the vote, so many working class communities feel so disillusioned that so many people won't vote in this forthcoming general election. And the turnout in the most deprived constituencies will be lower than in middle class constituencies.
And I'm a firm believer that the arts are a vehicle to give us something better. And on that basis, I can't help but believe that decisions like removing the art subjects from the EBAC have an ideological aspect. I don't think the people in power are stupid. I think they know what they're doing. I think they're removing opportunities for people to actually be able to think for themselves.
To lose the community role, which was unique and pioneering, going out, talking to people, recording them, going to schools and libraries, giving talks like my main talk is Many People's One Birmingham, to try and say, let's rejoice in our diversity, but let's also rejoice in our unity. To lose that role was really a blow at the age of 57 I was. It's changed my life. I think overall for the better, because I'm not beholden to nobody. When I was at the university teaching, there were many working class students that, even if I wasn't teaching, would come to see me and have a chat. And I'm still in touch with some of them. I remember one student coming to me really upset that a tutor, she was in a class, in a seminar, and he was going around asking them, what do you think of this? And he came to her and said, oh, you won't know the answer. You're from a comprehensive. I said to her, you've got to complain about it. But she would naturally, which I understood, she was too scared to complain in case it rebounded on her.
Yeah.
So we've got to smash that ceiling down, Ben. We have to smash it down. So every child, irrespective of their colour, their creed, their class, can have the same opportunities. At the moment, they're denied, particularly through the arts, to so many of our youngsters.
Yeah. And I've observed, in many, many ways, the energy, the valuable energy that comes from kids who've come from working class backgrounds when they're given that opportunity and they're taught that their voice has got currency, just like yours, your love of stories in your family. It brings an energy to a person's life and purpose that is just, rocket fuel.
And I think the other thing is, I don't blame any mum and dad that say to the kids, you need to change your accent a bit to get on. It's not the mum and dad's fault. It's society's fault. It's those who are in charge's fault for making working class people feel inferior for the way they speak.
Yeah.
The way that we speak is our language. We should be proud of it.
Like you said, the segregation and the way now that lower income families are all pushed further and further out of where their ancestral homes are.
It's happening in Birmingham all the time. And I don't know why councils seem to bow down before developers. And they allow them to build. In Birmingham, we've got so many high-rise towers of apartments. We don't need any more apartments. We need homes for families. And in Birmingham, it's really quite stark because on the top of the hill is the middle class central business district. It's really attractive. There's St Philip's Cathedral, there's the council house, grade 1 listed buildings, there's lovely bars and pubs and restaurants. But you go down the hill to what was the working class centre of Birmingham, the Bull Ring, and it's declining. There's no real investment going into the Bull Ring. Shrewsbury Market's won the best market of the year, I think, for the second or third time. And you look, they've got beautifully coloured awnings. Ours, it's all like metal. Everything's metal. And they're declining. They don't seem to want the traders in town. And yet the Bull Ring shopping centre, not shopping centre, the Bull Ring Market, sorry, are the only part of Birmingham where all Brummies of all backgrounds, colours and creeds and classes meet each other equally. Bhangra dancers and steel bands and Morris dancers and everything else that would show off all of our cultures coming together. But no, there's no vision. There's no vision. And the other problem is as well, is that every time a developer says, right, we're going to put this up, but instead of 10% social housing, it's uneconomical, we've got to have 3% social housing. They bake the social housing provision down to as low as possible. And the councils go, yeah, okay. Mm-hmm. That's why we need a massive council house building programme, a massive building of council housing or social housing, whatever it may be, to really bring back life, working class life, to the increasingly gentrified centres.
And again, to keep coming back to it, again, the arts is how you resolve that, is how you give outlets to that negative energy and you turn it into something really valuable.
I used to go to lots of schools, and I always went to schools in working class neighbourhoods because I have only got a limited amount of time. Schools in middle class areas get lots of visitors. Schools in working class neighbourhoods don't. So I always focused on them. And when I was giving my talks on the history of the area and talking with them and engaging with the kids rather than lecturing at them, it was always the teachers who come up to me after and says, some of these boys and girls don't engage with us normally, but they listen to the nans, especially the nans, and they'd be listening. And I'd say something like, who knows what the word blarted means, which is our old word for crying. And they put their hands up. I don't have an aunt says when I come in, sir, Mr. Carl, she tells us to stop blarting, and or else I'd talk about the street names, and suddenly they'd come alive with it. Mm-hmm. And it was always the toughest kids or the most difficult to reach for whatever reasons that might be. And if I could just bring in there about my Peaky Blinder research, very far from the glamorised gangsters, the anti-heroes that we see in the series, the Peaky Blinders were nasty men. They were brutal. They beat people up for no reason because they didn't like them. In the series, in series 1, one of the characters says, well, they're bad people, but they are bad people. They do bad things for us. No, they're not. They don't do bad things for us. They do bad things at us. So why should it be that in a working class neighbourhood, crime is allowed to escalate? What stopped it in Birmingham was strong policing, yes, more policemen in twos on the beat, stronger sentencing, yes, but churchmen and women and a few philanthropic middle class people putting on clubs, what we now call youth clubs, football, boxing for the lads clubs, girls clubs. So now a new form of entertainment's emerging at the same time, the pictures, the cinema. So instead of joining the gang on the street corner of older men and youths, they'd be going to the pictures. We have to have facilities for younger people. Why don't they learn that lesson? That closing down youth clubs, getting rid of all the facilities in a poorer neighbourhood, a lot of kids have got nothing to focus upon, and they get drawn in to the gang. So let's start from the bottom up. Let's invest in working class neighbourhoods instead of de-investing all the time.
They need entertainment. They need to be able to dream. They need to be able to feel like they're worthy. And, you can do that, like you said, through sports, through arts, through many different things. But the constant stripping of arts budgets, particularly by this successive Tory government, has been heinous. Youth clubs all closed down. And then, the voice of shock in their media and in their press that these, killings are happening. No, there's no shock there. This is inevitable when you take away all those things.
And I think, unfortunately, what we see is that the Labour Party under Tony Blair was moving away from the working class. They were becoming very much more a middle class organisation. I've marched for jobs in Paris. I've been to Munich. I've marched in London, all over. And the blokes I was marching with were saying, Carl, we could understand it from a Conservative government, but Labour's supposed to be our party. They've had such a sense of betrayal that factories were being closed down at a faster rate under the Blair government than they had been under Thatcher, which was disastrous. So we've got to really reconnect politics unless we get the political situation sorted out, Ben, nothing will change with funding for the arts. They haven't got the time to go out and become politicians. They haven't got the time to go out campaigning. They're trying to get by. E.P. Thompson quotes an old man after the new Paula was brought in with the hated workhouse. And this old man is saying, I think he was a framework knitter, something like that, a trade that was disappearing. He said, I'm in a certain situation, in a few years' time, my health will go. And I will end up, my children, I will not be able to look after me. I'll be in the hated workhouse. And do you know what he finished off with? England, my England, I love thee still. England, my England, I love thee. Not the political nation, that England in our soul, the England of his community, of his people, who we belong to, betrayed by the political nation. And that's what's happening today. There's that betrayal of working class people, the bearing down on their hopes and aspirations, cutting off avenues for young working class people to become engaged in the arts, be engaged in every form of art. Then everything's been cut off. And it's all about the cash nexus. The cash, you've got to get a job to do this. Now, don't get me wrong, we need a lot more apprenticeships. A lot more apprenticeships. But that should not come at the cost of arts. They can go hand in hand.
Yeah.
A lot of young people. My wife's a hairdresser. She's from a big council estate in North Dublin. I can't cut hair. My cousin's a florist. I can't put flowers together. We should be valuing all skills. We're all equal. And we should be aiming for so many of our kids to gain skills, to be able to use their hands, their minds, every aspect of them, and be treated equally and with respect.
Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. And
thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for your time, Carl. I really appreciate it. And good luck with the new book. When can we expect that, by the way?
Probably sometime in the new year. I'm just putting the finishing touches to it now. I've got to sort the photos out. It's a very in-depth study, this one.
Yeah. Are you able to say what it is? Or?
Yeah, it's about the real Peaky Blinders. I'm going back to them, but in a lot more detail. I'm looking at how they baited the police. That's the term they used. How they abused women, how they bullied the people, the hardworking poor amongst whom they live, how they were involved in riots and paid by the Liberal Party and the Conservatives to disrupt each other's meetings. So they were sanctioning violence for their own ends, and looking also at racist attacks on Italians and Jews. So it's been a really long research project and a very deep one.
Brilliant. I look forward to it.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Carl. Thank you, mate. Appreciate your time.
Take care, mate.